Welcome to Expressions of Leadership. I'm your host, Michele Kawamoto Perry. In every episode, we explore how people from educators and artists to executives and entrepreneurs lead with authenticity, rise through adversity, and share the wisdom they've gained along the way. Today, we have an incredible guest, Holly Uber, a human-centered technologist, award-winning product leader, and someone who has spent her career at the intersection of education, health tech, and emerging technologies. Holly has built AR/VR experiences used by over 1 million students, launched one of Roche's first software as a medical device, and led innovation communities inside organizations like Genentech, all while championing inclusive design, systems thinking, and the belief that technology should expand human potential. Holly, I'm so excited to have you here. Welcome to Expressions of Leadership.
Thank you. Really excited for our conversation.
Now, Holly, before we dive into your work at the intersection of science and technology and leadership, take us back. Where did your own curiosity for innovation and science and teaching begin?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't know that there's one moment. I think I have always had this curiosity, and we often think of children as being curious, paying attention, noticing different things. But I will say my dad was an inventor and engineer, and my mother was a teacher. So there really is a lot of connection in there. And I just had an amazing backyard. So lots of nature and fun, interesting things to explore with my siblings and also others on the street. So it's been something that I wouldn't have said early on, but I can see now how it all led me to where I am.
And you've had this fascinating journey, Peace Corps, teaching science internationally, moving into ed tech, and then into healthcare innovation. What through line connects all of these chapters for you?
Yeah, and it's easy, I will say, to look back and see through lines. As I was going through it, there wasn't always as a clear path. And I like to say that to help people think you might make different jumps in your career, and it might feel like you're not pulling a thread through, but often there's more than one. And so for me, there is always been this curiosity of science. And then I pulled in the science of learning. And so, how do we understand things, and how can I set up that innovation environment for others and guiding people, and then really bringing their voices to the table too? And I have loved being in different industries, being in different environments, because it's allowed me to notice where I had some of my own assumptions or where I have the cultural limitation. And so putting myself in lots of different environments has really helped me continue to be curious, continue to learn, but also continue to bring different ideas together. Because at the intersection of different industries and different technologies is really where exciting things happen.
And you built products for both large corporate environments and also scrappy, fast moving teams. How did each of those environments shape your understanding of innovation?
Yeah, and I'll even add I did things in the classroom too, which is a different type of product that you're putting in front of maybe 32 students to use right then, and you get to see that quick iteration and feedback or questions that happen, maybe change something for the next class. So all of these different places, I think, really helped me see different ends of that spectrum, right? So as I was saying in the classroom, I got really quick feedback on whether it was confusing or what types of learners, where they were with what we were learning, what we were doing. And then in the startup space, you are moving really quickly, which has some great advantages, but I didn't have the time to sit back and do some of the research because we had to get things out faster and more content. And then being at a big company, I had such amazing huge teams to leverage their insights. We could do research. We had budgets to do different things, but then it took a little bit longer to get things out to market. That also has to do with something being in a regulated space. Both education and healthcare, of course, have more considerations. So I would say all of those, and being in different types of environments is so beneficial to learning different ways. And I think I can always see multiple different options. And for me, that's been being in different environments. I can see different possible solutions. And when I can see multiple options, then we can work together to decide which is the best path forward, or maybe none of those, but a combination. And so it's been really powerful in coming up with different solutions and leveraging the team and whoever is there right then.
And speaking of things like regulations and whatnot, there's also risk that comes with innovation. And risk tolerance is this reoccurring theme across your work. How did you come to understand your own relationship with risk? And how has that shifted over your leadership journey?
For me, one of the things is going up and down the different levels and really always coming back to that human-centered technologist piece, because there are going to be people who are using this technology. And so I really want to remember who they are. And sometimes in product development, we think of a persona. And I really like to think of there being a whole person on the other side. So yes, we have personas, and that can be useful as an exercise, but it's going to be whole people with a full range of emotions, life experiences that are going to use this product. And I want to keep that in mind, so that as we're doing little things, even color, font size, that I'm remembering who it is that this product is there to serve. And so that's the biggest risk, is just remembering that person on the other side and being extra thoughtful and mindful about how they might be coming to the product. Because, for example, if the product's reminding them that they might have a health condition, I want to have that mindset as I'm building that product. And then, of course, there are other risks of making sure that that product is at the quality level that we need. And that always comes in as we're looking at making choices of, here's where the product is right now. What do we need to fix before it goes out? And I think a lot of that has stayed the same. But to your question, as I've had more and more experiences, I'm able to even be more expansive in understanding the risk. And what is really important to me is coming up with risk mitigations and then checking those with different people on the team too. I really appreciate having thought partners, whether it's legal or quality or regulatory, to really think through, here's where we are, here's what I'm seeing, here's what I'm thinking, what am I missing? And so being willing to ask that question and being willing to hear, understand different risks that maybe I didn't think of, and then work on having risk mitigation.
And how do you bring in all of those different voices from those different departments? Because I imagine that some of them may have some competing interests.
I would say it seems like there's competing interests. My goal, I would say one of the first things, is really helping see that we do have the same interests. We're understanding it, I would say, at different levels, and we have different kind of hats that we wear. And I want those people to wear that hat as we're having this conversation. But I think, to your point, one, we really are on the same team of getting this product out to serve that full human on the other side and help them, whether it's with a workflow or with something else. So that's number one. And number two is creating a learning culture. And so that starts with, as I mentioned earlier, I'm asking questions. So I'm not just presenting something, this is great and this is done, but here's where we are in the process. So coming earlier and saying, what have we not thought about? We're going to do some user research. What are some of the questions we need to ask from the users? And so having it be really that interaction and being honest when I want to get feedback and that I want to hear the risks that they're seeing earlier on. And so being that thought partner and then asking for that thought partnership. And so creating that space and that environment, it does take time and it can, as you said, be a shift for people to come into that space, especially if you're doing something innovative, because then it hasn't been done before. And so, how do we really look at that hat that we're wearing and that perspective in somewhat of a different way so that we can move this product forward too? Because we do want to get the product out to serve the individuals that it'll serve. And so that can be a different mindset shift of coming together. But that's a space that I love to be in and to really set up as well.
Now, I know that you're really passionate about teaching and mentoring. How have those skills shaped the leader that you are today, especially when it comes to developing people and fostering curiosity, which is so critical to innovation?
This is one of the things where I didn't know it at the time, but being a teacher, and especially I would say a middle school teacher, is great training and great practice for this because I was working with such diverse group of people and they were really coming in with different levels of understanding. And at some of what I was doing as a teacher was really translating. And that's exactly what happens in innovation too, is right, I might have an engineer in the room and I might have a scientist or I might have somebody that's really big into hardware, somebody that's in software. And so helping to translate that conversation, because often they need to understand each other at a certain level so that we can really have that thought partnership, whether it's around risks or whether it's around can we make this date that we planned or what do we do with this budget and do we need to move things around. So being a translator is a skill that was really important in the classroom and helping translate and giving instructions and is also important in innovation. And the other one that I mentioned earlier is how do you set up that learning environment? So of course that's key in the classroom, but just like you said, the curiosity and the learning and the helping people be willing to come to a meeting in a business setting and say, this is what I wish I had done differently, or this is where I learned something that I would like to share, or here's a question that I have and I'm really interested in people's perspective. That can be a shift into more of that learning together culture. And that is something that's also really relevant in the classroom.
Holly, you have this really interesting metaphor for leadership that involves painting with ink. Can you explain that metaphor and how it influences the way that you guide teens today?
Yeah. And I'll just um, start by saying I didn't think I was creative. And so it was really neat for me to notice, one of the places, because I was building and designing in virtual reality, and I realized this is creativity. It's not creativity in the way that I thought of it as being somebody that is a full-time artist, but this is a creativity. And so one of the things that I look to do to kind of expand my own play and creativity was taking a class in different ways of making art. And I love this woman's perspective in the class, which was really playful and helping us learn different techniques. So the one technique that I took away that I loved the most was ink. So an ink kind of from a dropper. And so what I enjoy doing is painting with water and then dropping the ink and seeing where it goes and moves. And it wasn't right away, but I realized as I was doing this more and having fun and exploring that this is innovation. So what do I do as a leader? I set that frame so that water, right? So where it can go, that we're going to listen to each other, for example, that we're going to follow the safety rules, whatever it is. And then different people can put on their different ink in different spots. And in some places it's going to go. And what's really interesting is the ink doesn't go everywhere where the frame is. And I just thought this really is the magic of innovation, because I have to let go of the outcome. And to me, in an innovation team, when we get the best results, we haven't come in with an outcome. We've come in with this frame, or these, some of it would be constraints, and we allow different voices to be there. Maybe it is the voice of the user, maybe it's somebody in the voice of the team. And then we've allowed that to mix and collaborate. And then we have something that none of us would have done on our own. And it was just such a fun visual picture. And I will say, I've talked with some people about this, and they kind of sit back a little bit afraid of that, this idea of, well, I don't know what I'm doing. And again, that feels so relevant to innovation of, that's okay. We get to play and be in that white space. And that's what I love. And so I also think using this as a representation or an opportunity is so powerful in that way, as well as kind of inviting people in to notice, oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about it in that way. And I can see where some of my resistance is coming up to that way. But that helps it to be a different type of discussion. Because I also find if we can talk about it in that art and playful way, then we can translate it to the innovation and the team. And that's so powerful, because it's somewhat disarming to sit and actually, I've sat down and actually played with some of this with people, and they're like, oh, okay, like it was a little bit scary. I don't like everything that came out, but this is what I learned, and I really like this piece, right? So it's not just a metaphor, but it's actually a practice that can be powerful for individuals or for teams as well.
Well, we're going to take a short break, and when we return, we'll dive deeper into how Holly builds environments where innovation can thrive. Stay with us. True transformation starts from within. The Forward Project partners with organizations to create meaningful culture shifts and develop leaders who inspire real change. If your team is ready to move forward with purpose, visit www.theforwardproject.co. Welcome back to Expressions of Leadership. I'm Michele Kawamoto Perry, here with our guest and innovation specialist, Holly Uber. Now, Holly, let's talk about the right environment for innovation. Clearly, psychological safety and that invitation to share perspectives and contribute ideas are important factors. But what other conditions do you think teams need to truly innovate?
So, as a product leader, I'll say one of the things that's hard, but really crucial, is being able to make decisions and move things forward. And I'll say I do it in two steps. So we have lots of ideas. And as we're actually looking maybe at a specific screen, one of the things I do is ask for the designers to come up with 3 or 5. Sometimes I like 5, but at least 3 different options so that we can make a decision from there. So it is going from that divergent thinking and starting to converge it into choices. And then absolutely the key is we do need to make decisions, and we often need to make them relatively fast and then test them and see if our assumptions were right. And so that's one of the keys as well, is being able to get feedback, not just from people that are in the room, but from potential users as well. And sometimes they'll surprise us and we'll need to go back and make changes. But that is kind of the process that's really key. And I think being willing to listen to something that counters what we thought was a good idea is another key. And so I love to try to do that in a way where it is somewhat quantitative so that we have some insight that it's not just one person that thought this, so that it allows us to make that decision. But that can be a really hard thing, to have something that felt so good and the team agreed and we got this there, and then get some of this feedback back that it was not, did not meet the needs or was confusing. And so being able to take in that feedback, quickly change it, and then get the next iteration out there, I would say is also another really important skill for innovation, because you have to listen to the feedback, and you have to be willing to change things. And even I would say sometimes when things are out in the market as well, sometimes the real world experience can be different. And so how are you listening to that? And what are your mechanisms for collecting that information in a way that allows you not just to hear what they're saying, but to also hear what they're not saying? And I would say that's one of the keys is, yes, you can have these metrics, but sometimes what that person is actually trying to do is under the hood. Often people like to tell me about features that they want, but when I ask them what they're trying to solve, one, it might be something that's already in the product, and so they can already do it just a different way, or it wasn't a term that they were thinking about, or maybe it is something that we need to add to the product, but that feature that they're requesting wouldn't actually solve that need. So the other thing is really paying attention to the needs of the user, whether it's them that's saying them from a customer. Customers often love to say what they need, or sales teams love to say what they need to be able to sell the product. And so being able to not just think about features, but also understand what's going on for that person in that workflow or using that product. So I think it's so important to create that space and then to create impactful products.
And I love that you talked about this idea of really listening, and not just listening to the words that people say, but what's maybe not being said. That's such a critical skill when it comes to leadership, is really being able to have that emotional intelligence to understand what's really happening in the room. So I'm curious, what are some key dynamics or team structures that might potentially quietly kill innovation?
So this is a really good question, and it gets a little bit to this idea of, like, I've been at small and big companies as well, and so there can be something in how teams are structured, but I often find it's more about how they're brought together. And so I think when I'm trying to bring groups together, I want to really acknowledge the insights and the values that those individuals or those areas of the business are bringing. And I think that sets it up completely different, whether or not there's a hierarchical structure. And so that, to me, a lot about how the teams and people are brought together and how they're included in a little bit higher of the strategic piece of the product. And I do know we need to sell it, and there's all these other pieces too, but often if we can have that conversation, and to me, it's not just me and them, it's also their manager or different things as well. So it's how people are able to come together around the value of the product and how we need to have these conversations. And we all are dreaming of what's possible, and how can we, as I mentioned, right, like, make some of those choices and get the product out there in a timeline that matters, in a budget that matters, and all of those things. So there's always that push and shove. And so we need to pull people together in a way that allows that conversation and acknowledgement of the value of the other perspectives too.
And speaking of values of people's contribution, how do you see the fear of getting it wrong show up differently whether it's the students that you worked with or whether it's in these highly specialized corporate teams?
This is such a great question, and I think it's so relevant. One, it happens on a personal level, and then absolutely happens in a classroom or happens on a team level. And I think it's something to really be aware about. And part of how I think about this is also, what are you celebrating? And I think that can do some to counter that. So I like to try to be proactive and reactive as well. That also comes from my teaching days in the classroom. But what is it that we're celebrating, and how are we celebrating wins and progress along the way? And I think that can go really far in helping realize, again, there's not one right way to do this. And we're not just saying, like, this is what we're building and we're just going to go build it, right? There's a lot of pieces to the puzzle and a lot of different insights, contracts, things that need to go into place. And so how do we build in the practice and of acknowledging some of those things, and then also acknowledging some of the things that we're learning, and then also acknowledging when people are giving insight as well, and like, oh, thank you, I hadn't thought about that, and here's how I see that now, and maybe we can bring it forward. So giving people acknowledgement, I would say on a lot of different levels, is really helpful. It absolutely is. Just, there is a strong fear, I guess I would say, of getting things wrong or saying things wrong. And I do think that's one of the big blockers to innovation, especially when you're doing something that's new and exciting and in that white space. And so another piece here is helping people see the risk too, that is across the different areas. And that's why we're bringing different expertise in as well. And then the other thing that I started to do more and more that I really liked was saying things that we're learning. So things that we're celebrating, and then also things that we're learning. And that created a space where I was presenting, okay, this contract took a month longer than we expected. Here's the things that we learned. And I will say that wasn't just shared out within my team, but in the larger organization as well. And so being willing to share those things, one, I didn't want anybody else to have to go through that, but it also starts to change the narrative from we failed or we got something wrong to here's something that we learned and we want to share it because we don't want you to have the same challenge that we had here. And these to me are slow cultural shifts that can take a while, but will pay you back so much making these changes. If you can do those in your team, it will completely change the dynamic. And then you won't have as much of those conversations. I think of it being like, well, this was my idea. And this was something that I did that was right. And what you did is wrong. And how to kind of not have those types of conversations at all.
And as you think about your own journey, how did you transform your own fear of getting it wrong into learning?
Yeah, I think because I put myself in so many different situations, I really worked on that muscle. And so to me, being in different cultures where there's different languages, like I wasn't able to speak the language well, right? So I was learning. So throughout my career, I've really worked on that muscle and seen the value of it. And that to me has been really helpful. Not that I can't keep working out that muscle. I think it's like some muscles is you have to keep growing, you have to keep working it, and you have to still just be willing to ask the questions, to be somebody who's a new learner and to learn something new. But when you have also, that paired with curiosity, it's a powerful combination that creates a fun white space that I love to be in. So I keep working it, but I also have seen the value, and that's been really helpful as I've grown in my leadership.
Let's take a brief pause, and when we come back, we'll walk through product building across education and healthcare and the mindset leaders need to stay adaptable. Don't go anywhere. Leadership isn't just about strategy, it's about people. The Forward Project helps organizations cultivate strong, adaptable leaders who create thriving workplace cultures. If you're ready to invest in your leadership team, visit www.theforwardproject.co to learn how. You're listening to Expressions of Leadership. I'm your host, Michele Kawamoto Perry. Let's continue our conversation with award-winning product leader, Holly Uber. Now, Holly, you've built products for educators and clinicians and patients and parents and enterprise stakeholders. How do you navigate those competing needs while staying true to the mission?
This is one thing I saw really quickly in education is you have, so the product that I was building there, the person who was buying it was also often a superintendent or the principal of a school, and so had a very set needs. And then the person who was introducing the product and using it to some degree was the educator. And then the person who was actually using it was a student. And so you had these three different levels. And to your point, they all had very different needs, experiences, and perspectives. And yet I couldn't forget any of those if we were going to actually sell a product that teachers would use that would encourage learning in students. And so the same thing for many products is in healthcare as well, because you often have the patient, you have the physician or the healthcare professional, and then you have the payer or the health system or hospital system. So lots of similarities between the two in creating products there. And absolutely, you need to think about all of those. And one of the pieces that is important is going back to that idea of what are the needs for the different groups, and then always remembering kind of who's going to use the product. And sometimes, even though the payer or the superintendent doesn't understand all of that, you can also communicate some of what that experience is to the student and the teacher. And then another thing that I did a lot was create learning and materials around the product that helped either that physician or the teacher use the product. So when I was in education, one of my roles was to actually go out to schools and train the teachers. And so that was such a good opportunity for me to get immediate feedback again, to watch hundreds of users using it. And this was the teacher. And then also, if I was able to be there for 2 days, I'd say, give me a group of students and you guys can all watch and I'll teach a class. And so helping them learn how to use the product and watch me use it was really powerful, because one of the challenges with using new technology is you sometimes bring your own fears or concerns or biases towards that. And so the teachers sometimes thought, oh, this is virtual reality, I don't know how to use it, the students won't know how to use it. And so by showing them what it looked like, that made such a big difference. So to me, I think about all three. Sometimes there was more in building the product, but then also I think about those individuals when I'm creating this script for my sales team, and then I'm creating the learning or the materials that go along with the product as well, because that's really key to helping that product be successful and making sure that you're getting over some of those bias or misconceptions that people often have when you're creating something innovative.
And you often talk about this idea of thinking like a scientist. How does that mindset help both innovators and leaders adapt to this rapid change around them?
Yeah, I think one of the big things is experimentation. And it's okay to experiment. And it's okay to say, hey, we're going to try this experiment and see how it works. And I've done that in meetings too and say, okay, actually, I'm going to give a little quiz at the end of this. And not, it's actually quizzing you, it's quizzing, did I get the information across in this meeting that I need to? And is this useful? And so experimentation can be really useful. And then the other one that's key to science is often looking for information to back things up too. And so not just chasing the white rabbit somewhere like, oh, so one person said that, we're just going to go over there. But where is it, or how can we get information to either prove or disprove, can be something that's really useful. And if you don't have that already in your product, then putting in the hooks to pull out some of that information. So I think both of those can be really important and help you and your team try different things in a way that feels fun, can feel fun, and then also get the evidence to help make empowered decisions.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more from Holly Uber, including delving deeper into why sharing mistakes is one of the most powerful actions a leader can take. We'd love for you to be a part of the Expressions of Leadership community. Follow us wherever you get your podcasts and connect with us on Instagram and YouTube at Expressions of Leadership. We're back on Expressions of Leadership. I'm Michele Kawamoto Perry here with our special guest, Holly Uber. Holly, can you tell us about a time when openly discussing something that maybe didn't go quite as planned actually strengthened your team? And what did that reveal to you about effective leadership and innovative environments?
Yeah, and I will say I'm often cautious about using the word mistake because I think that can sometimes be bring up something in people that's not useful for the conversation. But I was working with the product virtual reality, and I was flipping the stylus to use it in a different way because I wanted it to represent a pipette. We were doing a gel electrophoresis, which was fun. And the way that I was then holding it was different, right? And so the first iteration was really jumpy and was going all around. And so it didn't work out well, I guess is what I'll say. And so we had to really look at what was happening. So sometimes you need to have a visual to do that experiment to see what's happening and then to talk about it. And so what we're realizing is there's one piece of how I'm moving my hand. The other piece is how it's represented on the screen. And so we really needed to adjust those in a couple ways to allow this product to be used by somebody. And so I often find we can sit there and talk about things, but it's different when you can start to see it in action. And so to me, prototyping, which you could also call an experiment, is really key. And so we try to do as many of those as possible to notice things, to then have that conversation, move it forward. And I think the key there, though, is sharing that out, sharing what we learned from that and why we made different decisions, because not everybody is in those conversations. But what I don't want to have happen in innovation is we rehash something 4 or 5 times because somebody wasn't in that meeting. They're like, well, what if we offset it by this much and this? And so there's lots of different times where that is important to kind of say, this is what we looked at, this is what didn't work there, this is what did, and this is how we move forward. And then I can give you one other quick example, which I think is really important, is I came in to a product and was just kind of helping it get out the door. And then when I was understanding, I wanted to understand the needs so that I knew exactly what this product was doing. And when I sat there with the engineer, he said, "Oh, if that's what you're doing, we built it wrong." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." So it was such a good reminder to me. And then we had a bigger conversation with more people of the end goal of what this product is set to do. And so I think it's never a bad idea to reconnect to that use case that we have. Then it might change, right? But it's such a powerful experience. And sometimes it's nice when someone new comes in because then you have to go over some of these things, and that's a good refresher for people. Hopefully everybody knows it. But I think as a leader, being able to go back and say, like, yes, this is the why here, and these are some of the things that we tried, and here's where this is why we're at this stage here, is just so powerful. And I have so many examples of how that's made the big difference in the work that I've worked in the different products that I've worked on.
You're really talking about the power of humility and how you role model that and why that's so important. What are the misconceptions you'd love to dispel, particularly of the idea that a leader must know it all?
I think sometimes in education and healthcare, there's this idea of like being a sage on a stage, and you have to know everything, and that's why you're there. But to me, the reason I'm there is because I can set up the space for us to lead either that team or those students through that experience. And I can be the person who they can ask questions and I don't know the answer, and we can figure out how to find the answer. And that is when I work for a leader like that, it's amazing. And I think people see that when they have it, and yet it can be scary for people because I think there's, yeah, it's just the highest, one of the biggest misconceptions is that you need to know everything to be doing a job. But so many jobs didn't exist when I was in school. Like, it's such an interesting thing. There's also new jobs, there's new tech. And the person who can think critically, bring different voices to the table, is the one who's able to do unique innovations. And that's where I want to be.
And I think going back to this idea of thinking like a scientist, sometimes scientists are looked at as you're the people that know the answers because you've been studying all of this. And actually, the scientists are the ones who are asking all the questions because they're trying to understand everything around the subject that they are studying.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the keys is first you've got to ask the question before you can even experiment. And so being able to ask the question, why is it that we put wheels on this? Right? Like, that can lead to a completely different path. And there's that old saying, right, of if you ask people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse and not a car. And so it's the same thing here of what questions are we asking? How are we asking them? What questions are we asking of ourselves? How are we testing our own assumptions to really move the science? And that's where it's, to me, is such fun. It's like the science, human potential, as well as the emerging technology, or maybe it's not even emerging, like where are all three of those meeting and in service of that end user? And there's a good book that I like that's called Happy Accidents. And it is a lot of science too, is you come up with this and you're looking to study it, and maybe you find something else while you're answering a question. And then how do you take in that new information in a way that can maybe make a completely different discovery that was not your intention, but because you were setting up that experiment, you have this new invention. And I think, yeah, asking the questions and being willing to pay attention to what the answers are or aren't is so powerful.
And that speaks to something you've talked about before is that there's no single right answer. And when you're focused on that one right answer, you just might miss all of these other pieces of information that are really critical to finding the best solution.
Yeah, and I heard somebody reiterate something that sometimes as a leader, you don't speak first in a meeting because that can get to this idea of, well, whatever they say, we're going to go to. So sometimes I'll wait, or other times I'll intentionally give a couple different ideas to kind of counter what can feel like a pattern for people. And I think that's another way to continue to be a leader, but to also have that conversation that leads to more ideas than fewer ideas.
We're going to take one final break, and when we return, we'll explore Holly's vision of the future of innovation and wrap with our wisdom and whimsy segment. By partnering with Expressions of Leadership, you'll reach an audience of professionals passionate about leadership and growth. For sponsorship opportunities, please contact us at letstalk@expressionsofleadership.com. You're listening to Expressions of Leadership. I'm your host, Michele Kawamoto Perry. I'm joined by human-centered technologist and innovator, Holly Uber. Now, Holly, when you imagine the future of innovation across healthcare and education and emerging technology, what gives you hope? What are you excited about?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really fun right now is with AI and vibe coding, people from so many different backgrounds are able to prototype and experiment and test things out in a way that just hasn't been possible. And that means that, an engineer can act like a product person can act like an engineer. And so I think it's bringing and giving people some of the different perspectives that we would look to try to do kind of in conversation, but people can play around and test things out in a way that's faster and goes to that playfulness that I think is really important for innovation. So that's one of the things that's really fun right now is there's an opportunity to bring more voices and people to the table who might not have thought about doing innovation because of some of those barriers that were there before.
And what legacy do you hope that your work leaves for the next generation of innovators and leaders?
Oh, to me, the biggest piece here is thinking about the whole person on the other side and really looking to design for that full human with a full life and creating products and tools that really serve them. And then on the innovation team side, I really look to have that creative, innovative table where we're bringing different voices together. And I know technology is changing so quickly right now. And one of the things that I look to do through different workshops is how to bring more voices in, especially to the AI conversation, because I think that's an amazing technology. It's moving really quickly, but it is a tool. And so I want to hear more voices, whether it's even questions or ideas, because when we get to hear more voices, we're able to create more solutions that really are created for all of those diverse people and use cases and things that we won't think of until we bring some of those questions and voices to the table. So I want that legacy of bringing more people into the conversation to create more impactful and thoughtful products for people.
And what do you see as the best way to do that, to bring in these voices?
People are different. And so I do think there's some different ways to do it. One way that I've seen can be really effective is just sharing. So if this is more of a work setting, sharing what products people are trying or testing or using and doing it in a way where it's like, oh, I tried this AI scribe, for example. This is what I like. This is what I didn't like. And having somebody else share a different tool. This is what I like. This is what I didn't like. And I think when you're sharing it in a way that brings in the different perspectives, and maybe even everybody tries the same tool, say, oh, what do you like? What don't you like? That helps people realize that their insights matter and that them as a user can be just as valid as somebody else being a user. And so that's one of the ways. And also bringing different tools and letting people play with them, or getting a chance to observe somebody using something you've made too can be really powerful. So, and then outside of work, I think having different workshops and places to bring together different expertise and just allow that conversation and allow people's questions to be asked. Because almost always when someone asks a question, someone else in that room also has that question. And so helping people realize when you ask a question, you're helping other people in the room is such a good reminder. And so maybe it is doing that outside of the workplace. And that helps those people realize, oh, yeah, when I asked about where they got that data, they were training the AI. That's actually a really good question. So I'm going to go back and ask that in my workplace. And so I think it can be done in both places, but I don't think there's much of a substitute for just exploring and testing and trying things out, and doing it in a playful way that allows people to feel comfortable that's one of the keys. Because it's easy to sit and look at something that's far away and be like, oh, that's not for me. It's different to use it and be like, oh, actually, I like this and I don't like this. So maybe I'll try this version. And that's fine. It doesn't have to be for you. But when you're able to use something, it often changes that experience and that conversation.
Well, before we get to our final segment of the show, what's the best way for listeners to stay connected to your journey and your work?
Yeah, I love LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is where I am most active. So love connecting with people on there and interacting over the different things that I share. And I also love hosting and going to different events. And a lot of them I'll post on LinkedIn too. So if people are local, love connecting in real life as well and having some of these conversations at different events.
And now for our wisdom and whimsy segment of the show, where we ask our guest one advice question and one fun question. Let's start with the advice question. What's one piece of leadership advice you find yourself giving most often, especially to people stepping into their own voice as innovators?
Yeah, I think the biggest one here is so often we have our own narratives that are holding us back. And that it's hard and powerful, meaning often we need to really think about that narrative of I can't speak up or I can't do something or I shouldn't do something. Sometimes is running under the hood, but noticing that, then you get to choose maybe that narrative was useful earlier in my life, but I don't need to continue that story going forward. And so when you're able to pause, or maybe even in conversation with somebody, see that narrative, you have the opportunity to rewrite your story. And that can be one of the best ways to change how you're seeing yourself and then change what's possible for you. And it's so powerful. And I've seen it be so helpful for many people in a conversation, just saying, oh, it's interesting you have that narrative. Is that serving you or is it not? And just allowing that reflection to happen I would say I will never underestimate that the power of noticing a narrative and being able to then choose a different one if you want. If you want to keep it, great. If you want to choose a new one, you're welcome to.
I love that. And now for the fun question. If innovation could be any kind of adventure, what would it be and why?
Yeah, I think what's so funny to me is I think innovation is often seen as like a choose your own adventure book. And the challenge that I have with that is, as we've talked about, right, there isn't just one path. And so to me, I think it's more of this mystical adventure where different creatures or things are coming in, where you're making some of these choices and going down certain things, but it also has these unexpected things that come up. And so it's such a fun innovation is fun and it often is not what we expect it to be. But that is why it's innovation. And that's why we have the opportunity to create different things that we hadn't thought of before.
Holly, thank you so much for sharing your journey into innovation and your leadership with us today. Your ability to weave science and humanity and possibility together is really extraordinary. And I know our listeners will carry so much from our conversation.
Yeah, thanks for being here. And I hope some of your listeners might test out some painting as well.
And to our audience, thank you for joining us for another episode of Expressions of Leadership. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please follow, rate, and share the podcast so we can continue bringing you stories and insights from leaders who are transforming their fields. I'm your host, Michele Kawamoto Perry, and until next time, keep imagining new possibilities and leading toward them. If you haven't done so already, make sure to click on that follow button so you don't miss out on future episodes. Have a guest you'd like us to interview? Questions, ideas, or just want to say hello? You can reach us at letstalk@expressionsofleadership.com or connect with us on Instagram or YouTube. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, thanks to our amazing team behind the scenes for making this podcast possible, including our sound engineer, Graham Palmer, and my chief encourager and advisor, Jeremiah Higgins.